joy for me to be back in Thailand, the land of the smile. 5 minutes on the street confirms that slogan. And it's an honor in particular to be here with His Eminence and our other esteemed colleagues to discuss these very important issues. These issues are important not just for this region of the world, not just for Asia, but for the entire world. Because if we don't understand how to deal with the question of poverty, then we will go from bad to worse. We will see class tensions. We will see an unnecessary debilitation of our economies and more particularly of human life itself. And I think what is important for us to understand that unless we get this question right, it is hard for us to ever speak about anything to do with civil order. Now, a lot of people speak about love, but I think many people misunderstand what love is. Many people speak about the poor, but what do we mean by this? I'm reminded that just a week before Easter, there was a passage of Mary Magdalene, or Mary cleaning the feet of Jesus. And who was it in that context who spoke up on behalf of the poor? The concern that all of this beautiful oil and perfume was being spent washing the feet of Jesus. It was Judas. So speaking in the name of the poor does not guarantee a love for the poor. Because we can love abstractions all we want, but unless we love the person in front of us, it means nothing. Or to put it in an environmental context, everybody wants a clean environment, but nobody wants to take out the garbage. We must reduce from the abstractions to the concrete. And what I hope to present to you today are some thoughts about how we can go about concretely implementing the call of the gospel to love the poor. As I say, love is not a sentiment. In Italian, we have a much better way of expressing the intimacy of love. In the Italian language, we speak to our mother or our father, our child, our spouse, and we tell them we love them in a very intimate way. We say, ti voglio bene, ti voglio bene. Now this idiomatic phrase in Italian has rich theological depth to it, because ti voglio bene changes what we mean by love. Usually when we say, oh, I love that, or I love this, we mean that I direct my affection towards something because it attracts me. But ti voglio bene means I will the good of you. That love, far more than a sentiment, is an act of the will. And an act of the will also has to be an act of our reason. So it's not enough to just have emotions for the poor. We have to use our intelligence. And we know how people rise out of poverty. Your Eminence, I hope you won't report me to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith for pronouncing this heresy. But the truth of the matter is that all the charity in the world, all of the politics in the world, all of the aid in the world, the government-to-government aid, all of these noble intentions do not account for the astounding rise out of poverty of much of the world's population in the last 200 years. It is enterprise that has done that. It is access to work that has done that. It is business that has done that. And that's why His Eminence's talk on the vocation of business is such a crucial, foundational pillar for what we are talking about. Because there is in our society a constant negativity with regard to business. It's animated by various reasons. Many people, for many reasons, it may be envy, it may be your competitor has an advantage over you, it may just be a misunderstanding to think that because one person has more than another, that that one person who has more has taken it from the other. What we call in economics a zero-sum game. For whatever the reasons that exist, there is a suspicion of business. And perhaps, such as in Thailand, there's a good reason to suspect business. That is, so many businesses are interconnected with the government. The corruption that has been spoken about previously pervades so much of business that it distorts the real vocation of what business is. And this is so much the case that in the occasions that our Holy Father has had to address and critique practices of free enterprise, or this word that I don't like, capitalism, it has been interpreted by some people as a criticism of business. This is not what our Holy Father is saying at all. In fact, in his apostolic letter, Evangelii Gaudium, here's what our Holy Father says, reiterating the idea from His Eminence. Business is a vocation, a noble vocation, provided that those engaged in it see themselves challenged by a greater meaning in life. This will enable them, now listen to this, this will enable these business people he's talking about to truly serve the common good by striving to increase the goods of this world and make them more accessible to all. This is a call to business, to a certain kind of business, a business that accords with the authentic anthropology of who human beings are. But it is a clarification of the nobility of business. And so I would like to show you a clip from a series that our institute has done. The Acton Institute has produced a six-part series called Poverty Cure. This is just an 8-minute clip that gives you a kind of antipasto for the whole of the series. And it is available. In fact, we have a whole website that you can see many of the interviews that you're just going to get a little bit of here. I'd like you to look at this, and then I'll come back and talk to it. So this is just about an 8-minute clip.
Around the world, there are a lot of huge hearts that are trying to make a difference to help the poor, but I don't see as much where those hearts are then being filtered through a mind to say, let's understand the complexity, let's understand that there are no easy answers.
We've talked about shifting the emphasis from aid to enterprise and from poverty alleviation to wealth creation. We're going to focus on enterprise solutions to poverty. We're also going to focus on the human person, who's the source of prosperity. When we understand people made in the image and likeness of God with creative capacity, it changes absolutely everything about the way we understand wealth and poverty.
I'm frustrated with this idea that poverty means living on $1 or $2 a day. That is a very bad way to state the problem.
You are stuck in a village with all your skills and all your talent. And that's just, unfortunately, the way it is.
One careless, romantic vision of the poor is that they are being so exploited that they should just be left to retreat into self-sufficiency, uncontaminated by the dirty business of a market economy. And, of course, that is just romantic nonsense.
Being poor has something to do with being excluded from networks of productivity and exchange.
So it's not that people don't have the capacity, it's that the access is not democratized.
The people here are not stupid. They're just disconnected from global trade. That's all. There are situations where I've set up a business deal and NGOs will hear about it and they find a way to bring aid money and provide it for free. So what happens to my investments? I have to lay off my staff.
It's a very big challenge. Hurt my business a lot.
Your help is hurting.
Feeling good about yourself is not the same as doing good. And in any case, good policy is more important than good feelings, especially about yourself.
We need to be able to move from aid to production, from existing to living.
History has demonstrated with indisputable clarity that people can grow the pie of wealth and discover new sources of wealth through enterprise and innovation. Now, this insight is foundational for working with the poor because it reminds us that people, created in the image of God, are not the problem. People are the solution.
Here we are in Kenya, and the one thing that is manifestly obvious on any street you walk down in Kenya is the energy of the people. You can just tell that they're looking for opportunities, they're going someplace, they have a sense of determination, they have a sense of purpose. And yet, just in back of the facility that we're at here, there's a huge slum the size of Central Park. Why is that?
My name is Joshua Omoga. I'm a businessman operating a shop within Kibera.
I was very convinced that the way to add value to my family, the way to have positive impact in my community and society was if I started to build a business.
Small and medium-sized enterprises are a critical part in the development process.
I started a small company in Ghana. Started pineapple juice with 4 or 5 workers, and I've come to this stage where I have 20 workers.
If I'm empowered to work and take care of my family, I can pay for health service. I can pay for school. I can do this and do that and move out of poverty.
The reason you want to open up the economy is so that people have the opportunity of taking destiny into their own hands, so that you can reduce poverty by creating opportunities.
Growing up in Asia, seeing the Asian tiger economies that 30, 40 years ago had a lower GDP than Uganda or Kenya, transform themselves through enterprise, not through aid, not through philanthropy.
One country that doesn't often come to mind when we think about development is Ireland.
The history of Ireland is one of abject poverty, of struggle against starvation.
Human beings are not animals. Animals are the ones who go around and look for food all day and then get tired and sleep, and then next day begins in search of food. Human beings are created for a much bigger mission, to take care of the whole planet.
A human being is much more than a mouth that consumes. A human being is a mind that creates and that produces.
What creates wealth? People create wealth. The source of wealth is inside our head. It's our creativity, something we've been endowed with.
There's got to be more than just change in a wallet for significant change to happen.
Free markets create prosperity, but they don't take care of orphans. People do.
We thought that we are caring the people who are dying. We thought that we are accompanying them to die, but we are accompanying them to live.
When you have the opportunity to touch hearts, to touch meaning, to touch purpose, to touch identity alongside helping an individual get out of physical poverty, that's where you see incredible transformation.
Every simple person, the homeless standing there who doesn't know where he is, there is a soul there. There is God who have made them. Is an act of God.
Is man's greatest resource. These are the words of St. John Paul II in his encyclical letter, Centesimus Annus. If we do not change the concept of who human beings are, if we only think of human beings as mouths that need to be fed, as I said in the documentary, then the increased population becomes a threat to the whole population. And this is why we have the zero-sum mentality so active in the United Nations, wanting to contracept or abort, to get more people off the planet for fear that there will not be enough resources. But if you take as your beginning anthropological presupposition that man is man's greatest resource, then every human being becomes so invaluable. I think this is the beginning of the change in our economic systems. That is the beginning to understand the dignity of the human person as the basis for civil order, because it is the civil order that is made for man and not man for the civil order. When we see human beings as created in the image and likeness of God, or put it in any traditional or philosophical language you like, that places the primacy on the human person, then you see creativity as emerging naturally from people who are free. You remove from them the hindrances to produce the things that they need for themselves and for their families. As part of this, what is indispensable is the practical ability of people to do that, which is what we commonly call business, which depends upon the freedom of the mind to create and the legal structure that protects the right to private property and contract and the general rule of law that protects human beings to be free in their peaceful acting with one another. Having this anthropological vision, forming young men and young women, as well as people who are already in business with this understanding, means that they see their work as a calling that echoes back to the first page of the Bible, when God himself was the first entrepreneur. You remember when it says that God makes the heavens and the earth. He imposes order on what was previously chaos. And he literally manipulates, that is, he works with his hands to produce the material world and pronounces the material world as good. And then, when he creates man and woman in his own image and likeness, and remember the anthropological vision here is that he forms man from the dust of the ground and breathes into man the breath of life, so that man himself is a composite of the physical and the transcendent. What are the first words that God speaks to this newly created human family? It's a vocation. It is a calling to have stewardship over all that God had created and said was good. So in this way, man continues the creation of the world. Business, commerce, exchange are ways of bringing human intelligence into association with one another, because this is the way in which prosperity results. It is a vision of the human person that is so beautifully articulated by the British writer C.S. Lewis. He reminds us that we have never seen a mere mortal. This is the thing that all business people, all politicians, and those who form the laws of our land need to remember. Lewis says you have never met a mere mortal. Everyone with whom you have ever come in contact is either an eternal splendor or an everlasting horror, but you have never met a mere mortal. Every shop girl with whom you have ever exchanged goods, every person you have ever loved, every neighbor you have ever hated, is either an immortal horror or an everlasting splendor, he says. And then Lewis goes on to say something else. He says that the most sacred thing that presents itself to our senses, next to the Blessed Sacrament itself, is our neighbor. If we are permeated with this anthropology, then what will happen in the way we treat our customers? What will happen in the way we treat our clients? What will happen when we have to dismiss somebody from a job? How will we do that differently? Even though it is a difficult decision, but we do it with respect for the dignity of that person who is called to a destiny beyond this earth. Entrepreneurship, Centésimo Sano says, throws practical light back on to the church's teaching. Notice that. It's not just the church's teaching that gives us something to learn about business, but it's that business itself throws practical light onto the church and what we mean by human dignity in this concrete, non-abstract way. Along these lines, we understand that this has to do with sacramentality. Business has to do with sacramentality. It is a way in which we sanctify this world. In our catechism, we have all learned, Sister would say, what is a sacrament? And we would say a sacrament is an outward sign of an inward grace, things like this. That is, every sacrament involves something material. In marriage, it's the conjugal union between husband and wife, open to new life. In the Holy Sacrament of the Mass, in the Eucharist, what is it that Jesus gives us? He says, take bread and wine. You notice that it's not grain and grapes. What's the difference between bread and wine and grain and grapes? Bread and wine has undergone human transformation. It is the work of our hands. And in this we see the dignity of labor. And we offer to God something that we create, and He gives us back something that we could never create. So this notion of sanctifying the world through business, in a small sense, it's the sanctification, it's the sacramentalization of the world. One of the Paritises of the Second Vatican Council, Yves Congar, had written a marvelous book on the laity. In fact, much of the document on the laity is really the reflection of Yves Congar. But he said something fascinating in that book. He said, with regard to our business places, we should not seek to Christianize them. You Christianize something by putting religious objects around and making it appear religious. He says we should think deeper. We should Christo-finalize our business. That to understand that our work in the marketplace itself is the touching of God's creation and continuing that creation. So we bring it to its proper end. We Christo-finalize. I think all of this kind of theological reflection is seen in the one concrete suggestion that our Holy Father, past Holy Father Pope Benedict, made in his encyclical Caritas in Veritate, where he calls for something, and I haven't seen this discussed, it would be worth having a conference all about this. He calls for what he describes as fiscal subsidiarity, by which he means not so much NGOs going in and redistributing money for all of the political problems that it's caused, as you see in this film, but of people being able to take a portion of their tax responsibility, their tax liability, and invest it in actual businesses, not in countries, not in abstractions, but in enterprises that are going on, so that these people can be the creatures that God has called each of them to be. Etienne Gilson, a French philosopher, put it so well, and I think this is where we can help with the formation of our men and women who are in seminaries or in religious life, and this applies as well to our Protestant brothers and sisters and to those, in some sense, throughout the world, people who are of goodwill. What Gilson said was that if you look at the facade of Notre Dame, that is a beautiful architectural construct. It represents the rising of the soul to God. He said, you must first, if you want to ever do something like that, you must first understand geometry. And then he went on to say, piety is never a substitute for technique. For without technique, piety is helpless to make use of nature for the glory of God. And this is why those of you who are in business are so important in the life of the new evangelization, in the life of the church. You, especially you, not the clergy, are called to be the leaven in the midst of the world. As leaven is insinuated into the dough, and the yeast begins to grow and affect the whole loaf, so you bring with yourself, if you're well-formed, if you understand who you are, if your dignity is grounded in a right understanding of your vocation precisely as lay people, precisely as business people, you can carry that vocation into your business place and Christo-finalize your workplaces. And this, over time, will have an impact on the whole of society. This is the model for us to go forward. We cannot hold back the engines of enterprise. In 20 years, our whole world will be different, even as it is different now from 20 years ago. But if there is not a moral purpose driving that enterprise, if it's merely freedom for the sake of freedom rather than freedom for authenticity, freedom for the truth, then we will create a beast that will devour us all. It is not just commodities. It is not just profit. It is profit with the right anthropological basis to it. There was a story of a monk who went into the monastery, and he wrote home to his father and mother. And he said to them, "Mother and Father, I am so happy that I found my vocation away from the world. I'm in the monastery, and in the middle of the night, when all of the world is hushed, we rise from our beds to pray the divine office, the Psalms." He said, "I found my vocation in this." And his father, who was a very wise man, wrote him back and said, "Son, your mother and I are so filled with joy that you found your vocation. But I want to remind you of one thing. Many a night, your mother and I rose from our beds when all the world was hushed to change your dirty diapers. And in this we found our vocation." The simplicity of finding a vocation in something so mundane as a baby's diapers, in something so mundane as a printing press or an accounting firm, in front of a blackboard or in a kitchen. Finding one's vocation where you are and doing work not merely for the utilitarian purpose of making a gain. That's good, that's necessary. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, if you make a profit justly, it proves that you have accomplished what you set out to do. Profits are not sin. They're an accomplishment of what you set out to do. But if that's all you settle for, then you demean yourself. You demean your own dignity. Consumerism isn't bad because people consume. We have to consume. Every time you take in a breath or eat something, you're consuming. No, consumerism is bad because it worships what is beneath us. It takes the object that should be a means and makes it an end. And so I close today with a reflection that came from Mother Teresa of Calcutta. Now, you and I know that she was no economist, and yet she offered one of the most brilliant responses to Marxism that I have ever heard in her simple and honest way. Mother Teresa said, "We have no right to condemn the rich. We do not believe in class struggle. We believe in class encounter, where the rich save the poor and the poor save the rich. The rich save the poor not primarily by the redistribution of their wealth. That may be appropriate at certain times in certain prudent places. But the rich save the poor by enterprise and enabling the poor to enter that circle of exchange, breaking down the barriers of admission so that the world itself may prosper, which was God's original intention in Eden." Thank you very much for your time.